labor peace at the ports, automation takes center stage, and jobs that are the most prone to injuries. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories, as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by Zebra Robotics Automation. How can you drive down your cost per unit and make every movement count? Read Zebra Robotics Automation's latest ebook, Unlocking Fulfillment Potential, to learn how their Zebra Symmetry fulfillment ecosystem was engineered to boost your profits. You'll discover a unique threefold strategy that enables workers to pick more items in less time, with up to 30% fewer robots compared to legacy systems. Download it now at zebra.com/fulfillment. Ben Ames is off this week, so sitting in for him is Susan Lacefield of Supply Chain Xchange. She and Victoria Kickham will be along shortly to talk about supply chain trends. But to begin today, with the ratification earlier this week of the new 6-year agreement between dock workers and ports on the East and Gulf coasts, it seems like we'll have some labor peace that will last a while. To discuss what that bit of certainty means to shippers and carriers, here is Victoria with this week's guest. Victoria?
Thanks, Dave. Our guest today is Brian Lynch, Transportation Sector Leader at EY Americas. And as you say, he's here to talk about the implications on supply chains of the finalized contract for dock workers at East and Gulf Coast ports. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Victoria. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. I wanted to start by asking you, just tell us a little bit about your background and what you do at EY Americas.
Sure. As you just mentioned, I lead our America's transportation logistics sector. So that covers airlines, railroads, trucking companies, maritime, and logistics firms. Prior to EY, I've been with EY now for about 10 years. Prior to EY, I spent many years in this sector with a couple leading companies that you all have heard of, know, and love. So yeah, great to be here.
Terrific. Thank you. So the deal we're talking about, this deal kept the ports open under the threat of a strike in January, and it was cheered by many, including shippers. I wonder if you can summarize the main points for us. What does this agreement do for the parties involved, first of all?
Sure. It may be good to take a step back and talk briefly on some of the key milestones, because again, this is over a five-month period since the official expiration of the contract. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but 5 months ago, September 30th is when the legacy contract expired. There was indeed a 3-day strike in early October, but they fairly quickly did reach agreement on wages. Then what's interesting is they decided, hey, we reached agreement on wages. Let's extend the contract until mid-January, so January 15th. Basically a 3-month extension to that legacy contract. If we fast forward then to January 2025, just before the January 15th expiration, the two sides did iron out a tentative agreement. So it was indeed reached just a week or so prior to the official expiration. And the agreement was ratified this past Tuesday, February 25th, 2025, and will be fully executed in mid-March. Now, in full disclosure, I have not seen the final text of the agreement, but based on sources and information, the three main points, number one's wages. So a 62% increase over the 6-year term of the contract. That was the big one, and that was the piece that was decided in October. The next piece, automation. So automation at the ports, what we'll start to see is terminal operators and the ocean carriers as well get broader rights to introduce automation or advanced technology. At the same time, the union receives guarantees for new jobs linked to that automation. So it's somewhat of a win-win that I can get into later. And then there was a few other items like healthcare plan and container royalties and so forth. Now you did mention that it was cheered by many, and that's indeed true. And I think that's really because there was no disruption to the supply chains. And companies were prepared for the worst, and the disruption was minimal. Also, it was unique in that the negotiations were split into those two parts. So again, wages agreed to in October, and then the balance of the items in January. And then finally, it gets both parties, all the parties back to work. It puts negotiations in the rearview mirror and ultimately keeps commerce moving. So very long-winded answer,
Yeah,
Victoria.
that's okay. That's all right. And you mentioned automation, which I know is a major sticking point, and I want to talk more about that in a bit. But outside of that, what are some of the implications then on supply chains in the broader economy? Just either, looking at it right now in the short term or the longer term.
Sure. Well, from an operational standpoint, it's largely status quo, especially in the near term. From a cost standpoint, you will see increases within the supply chain, largely due to the wage increases. So there's certainly some parallels there that we'll see. And then longer term, again, we'll talk about automation a bit more. We'll start to see hopefully see some additional efficiencies as again the parties continue to work together.
Yeah, so let's dig into the automation piece a little bit. There were reports that said, this protected, workers from the threat of automation, but then, others say it paves the way for modernization. I think you've alluded to that. Do you have any insight on how this will play out, and, what does this signal about the future of technology and job security at U.S. ports?
So a balance was struck. Both sides found satisfaction on the automation issue. The door is cracked slightly open for automation. It's open more than it was previously. And of course, there's a guarantee for jobs linked to that equipment or the new automation that's brought in. Now, again, hopefully this begins to strike a balance between protecting jobs and ultimately upskilling the labor force, which can be a real positive, I think. And then ultimately, again, increasing the um, port efficiency, things such as throughput and turnaround time for the vessels.
I know you said you haven't seen the text of the agreement, but do you know, like, are there types of equipment or types of automation that's been talked about, or is that all to come?
Yeah, I think that's all to come. When we talk about automation, it could be anything from as simple as let's say a security gate through the much more complex, expensive material handling cranes and things of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see I expect the contract will be released here in mid-March. So it'll be interesting to see some of the details there.
How does the agreement position U.S. ports against international counterparts? Especially now, it's such a fast-changing trade landscape. How
Mhm,
does how does
mhm.
that how does that all work?
This is another interesting topic. So comparing U.S. ports to other global counterparts, it's been difficult. There is data. Most reports that you'll see out there, uh, again, they're based on available data. The more popular and trustworthy are based on vessel time and port. So the World Bank, S&P Global Intelligence, and others do have reports around that efficiency as it relates to time and port. Now, based on those reports, which is pretty much the best we have, the U.S. ports lag, and they significantly lag. Now, the big asterisk here is, are we comparing apples to apples? Are we comparing apples to oranges? That's always the difficulty. So things like ship size, congestion at the port, labor shifts, equipment repairs, things like that come into play. So we don't always have the full story. The US, with if you look at that list, the top 100 ports, let's say globally, the US has 6 or 7 in that top 100. The challenge is our highest ranking, it comes in around number 50 or so, so somewhere in the middle of the pack. Now, certainly our hope is to start closing that gap and elevate the US in those rankings and future rankings.
Just to wrap up, what other port-related issues are you watching closely right now? Issues or concerns that, our listeners should pay attention to as well.
Sure, sure. Well, it's a dynamic environment.
Hmm.
In addition to labor and automation, there are indeed a few items that we at EY keep our eyes on. One of those being infrastructure investments. So the importance of inland waterways, dredging of harbors, the condition of the docks and the bulkheads, all very important, all very expensive to maintain as well, but critical. Number two, I would say environmental and regulatory policy, also top of mind. Also with new administrations comes some new rules or bending of rules, which we're keeping a close eye on. And then finally, geopolitics, so changing trade lanes, tariffs, and so forth. Fortunately, I have great colleagues with deep expertise in these areas, and we're closely monitoring things of that nature.
Brian, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you giving us an update on this issue.
Oh, sure, Victoria. This has been great. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you. We have been talking with Brian Lynch of EY Americas. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Brian and Victoria. As I mentioned earlier, Ben Ames is off this week, so joining us from our sister publication, Supply Chain Xchange, is its executive editor, Susan Lacefield. Welcome back again, Susan. Good to have you with us.
Dave, it's always a pleasure to pinch hit.
Susan, Supply Chain Xchange has just published its March-April issue, which is on the theme of automation and robotics. Can you give us some insight into some of the trends that we've covered in this issue?
Yes, thanks, Dave. So one of the most interesting trends to me is that mobile robots in the warehouse, such as autonomous mobile robots or AMRs, goods-to-person systems, and even automated storage and retrieval systems, have really become mature technologies. The analyst group Gartner came out with one of their hype cycle reports for mobile robots last summer, and AMRs, goods-to-person systems, and ASRS are all firmly in what they call the slope of enlightenment. And that's the point where there has been a lot of implementations by a range of companies and organizations. And there's really a true understanding of how the solutions can be applied and what the risks and benefits are. And it no longer seems like having robots in your warehouse makes you an early adopter. Instead, Gartner is saying that AMRs are in really the early mainstream phase. And I don't know about you, Dave, but it feels to me, and I would be interested in your and Victoria's thoughts on this, that the hype around mobile robots in the DC didn't get to as fevered pitch as we've seen with other emerging technologies such as RFID or the Internet of Things, or more recently, Gen AI. And as a result, what Gartner calls the trough of disillusionment, they're pointing the curve after all the hype when people seem to become disillusioned with the technology. That part of the curve for mobile robots didn't seem as deep or as long. It felt like we moved more easily into this mainstream adoption phase.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's just because it seemed to work. It was a technology that has some benefits. So with mobile robots moving into the mainstream, are people thinking or talking about implementation strategies any differently?
Yeah, so as we're moving into this phase, there seem to be rules of thumb developing about what types of solutions work best for what types of companies. For example, we have experts in the issue saying that if you're a fast-moving mid-market retailer, you should be looking at more advanced automation, such as ASRSs and robotic pickers. Whereas if you are a slower-moving mid-market retailer, you should be considering more incremental automation. So instead of a full-blown ASRS, maybe automated case handling robots that can work with your already existing rack systems. Also on the hardware and software side, vendors seem to have moved more into the phase of refining their offerings, focusing on making AMRs even more mobile or adding more artificial intelligence or looking into the sustainability piece.
Susan, of course, this issue of supply chain exchange dealt with robotics and automation as the main theme. Did you look at any technologies that are less mature and more in the area of what we call that emerging tech?
Yes, so we do have a piece on applications for generative AI in the warehouse, and Gen AI does seem to be one of those technologies that are having a very sharp rise in hype and now a very sharp drop into the of disillusionment. But one area where Gen AI may have applicability in the warehouse is in creating and updating processes and procedure documentation. And this is something that AI can do a lot quicker and customize more easily than humans can, all with the caveat that anything that's generated by Gen AI should be reviewed by someone who actually does the work to make sure that it is correct.
Right. Well, that's all very interesting. We look forward to seeing the issue, and our readers can soon find the stories that you talked about and more on the Supply Chain Exchange website, and that is thescexchange.com, thescexchange.com. So again, thanks, Susan. We appreciate you being with us this week.
Thanks for having me.
And Victoria, there are lots of jobs that can be rather dangerous and at risk of injury. We know that supply chains are no exception to that. You wrote this week about new research that ranked jobs that are prone to injuries. So, how did our industry do on this list?
Well, it's probably not a huge surprise, but logistics is a pretty hazardous business. We write about safety issues frequently at DC Velocity, both in the warehouse and on the road. It could be a story about, ergonomic solutions that can ease worker strain inside a facility or at a loading dock, or even about ways to improve driver safety in trucking and transportation. But as you say, this week I came across a report that helps put this issue into perspective. It's from a footwear company called Kuru that did some research into the most injury-prone workplaces in the country. Transportation and warehousing ranked first out of about 19 industries cited in the report, making the two primary areas of our coverage some of the toughest places to work, at least in terms of injury rates.
Yeah, well, that does make sense when you know the kind of jobs that people do. But what were some of the criteria that was used to determine the results in that research report?
So the researchers used Bureau of Labor Statistics data to analyze the most dangerous jobs. They cited 2023 figures on non-fatal occupational injuries and illnesses by industry. They said 2023 was the latest data available. And as I said, transportation and warehousing ranked first out of about 19 industries with a rate of 4.5 injuries per 100 full-time workers. To put this into a little bit of context, arts, entertainment, and recreation was second with 4.3 injuries per 100 full-time workers, and agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting ranked third with 4.2 injuries per 100 workers. The researchers cited the heavy machinery, long hours, and unpredictable conditions associated with both transportation and warehousing as key contributors to those high injury rates. And as I said, this probably doesn't come as too much of a surprise to professionals working in these industries. But again, I thought it was interesting to put some statistics behind what we know can be a pretty hazardous occupations.
Right, and it certainly is interesting to see that. And it's probably another reason why it's always difficult to find good workers for supply chain jobs.
Yeah, probably.
Thank you, Victoria.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Brian Lynch of EY Americas for being our guest. We welcome your comment on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by Zebra Robotics Automation. Are you tired of overpriced, underutilized autonomous mobile robot fulfillment solutions that drain your profits? It's time to switch to Zebra Robotics Automation. Their cutting-edge Zebra Symmetry fulfillment solution is engineered to reduce your cost per unit and give you that unbeatable competitive edge. Don't settle for less. Maximize your profits with Zebra. Discover the future of fulfillment at zebra.com/fulfillment. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.